The 1970s had no shortage of music that made program directors nervous, parents furious, and politicians reach for a microphone. Some songs were pulled for drugs, some for sex, but the ones that caused the deepest trouble were the ones about violence. Here are 9 censored songs that were too violent for the 70s. Number 9. Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting by Elton John, 1973. By 1973, Elton John was one of the most commercially successful artists on the planet, and he was about to test how far that goodwill extended. Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting, written by John and his longtime lyricist Bernie Taupin, was released in July 1973 and reached number 7 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 9 on the UK singles chart. It was the lead single from the Goodbye Yellow Brick Road double album, one of the best-selling albums of the decade, which also contained Benny and the Jets, Candle in the Wind, and Crocodile Rock. The song was a deliberate genre break, a hard-charging piece of boogie rock that sounded nothing like the polished ballads that had made John famous. Taupin wrote the lyric based on his memories of the rougher pubs and clubs of rural Lincolnshire, where he grew up, places where Saturday night regularly ended in physical confrontation, where drinking was serious business, and where the weekend's entertainment was sometimes indistinguishable from a brawl. The lyric described drinking, aggression, and the appeal of a good fight with a cheerfulness that radio programmers found difficult to accommodate. Several American radio stations refused to add it to rotation, citing its content as glorifying or encouraging violence. The BBC was cautious about it in the UK as well. The irony, as anyone who listened closely could tell, was that the song was more documentary than endorsement, a portrait of working-class weekend life in rural England that happened to be delivered with considerable musical energy. None of that nuance particularly mattered to the program directors who pulled it. The song has remained in Elton John's live repertoire consistently since its release. It closes most of his concerts. He performed it at his farewell Glastonbury show in 2023, and it remains one of the most purely physical things in his catalog, a rock song that sounds exactly like what it's about. Number 8. The Ballroom Blitz by Sweet, 1973. Sweet were a British glam rock band who spent the early 1970s occupying an interesting double life, recording polished, radio-friendly singles for mainstream consumption, while simultaneously pushing against the boundaries of what was acceptable, both musically and lyrically. The Ballroom Blitz, written by Mike Chapman and Nicky Chin, and released in September 1973, reached number 2 on the UK singles chart and number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song was inspired by a real incident, a concert Sweet had played in Kilmarnock, Scotland in 1973, at which the audience became violent and pelted the band with bottles and other objects. They were genuinely frightened during the performance and escaped off stage as quickly as possible. The experience went directly into the writing of the song, which describes a concert that descends into chaos from the first moments. The opening spoken introduction, delivered by guitarist Brian Connolly, described the scene so vividly, and with such apparent relish, that several radio stations refused to play it on the grounds that it appeared to be celebrating concert violence at a moment when real concert violence was a genuine public concern. This was 3 years after the Altamont disaster, and the relationship between rock concerts and physical danger was not an abstract question for broadcasters. The song has appeared in countless films, television shows, and advertisements over the decades. Its energy is genuinely infectious. There is something in the arrangement that communicates the physical chaos it describes. Whether that was a good argument for banning it or against banning it depended entirely on where you sat. Number 7. Dead Babies by Alice Cooper, 1971. Alice Cooper, The band in the early 1970s, before the name referred only to its frontman Vincent Furnier, spent those years pursuing the title of most outrageous act in popular music with the focused intensity of a professional project. They had stiff competition from the likes of the New York Dolls and early Black Sabbath. They won. Dead Babies appeared on the 1971 album Killer and ran for nearly 6 minutes. A dark, descending piece of music built around the story of a child named Betty, whose parents were absent, drunk, high, or otherwise unavailable, and who died after swallowing aspirin from the medicine cabinet. The album itself reached number 21 on the Billboard 200. Cooper has said in interviews many times that the song was explicitly anti-child abuse, an attempt to draw attention to neglect and parental irresponsibility at a time when the subject was not discussed openly or publicly. In the stage show that accompanied the Killer tour, Cooper would chop up baby dolls and throw their pieces into the audience, a theatrical choice that did not help the anti-neglect interpretation land with the general public, the press, or the parents' groups that were beginning to organize against the band. The song was never going to get radio play, and it didn't. The outrage it generated, alongside the rest of the Cooper stage show, led in 1972 to calls from members of the British Parliament to ban the band from performing in the United Kingdom. Leo Abs, a Labour MP, described their act as representing the culture of the concentration camp. Mary Whitehouse, the country's most prominent moral campaigner, was similarly opposed. The combination of the parliamentary pressure and the newspaper coverage made Alice Cooper one of the most famous band acts in British rock history. And their next album, Schools Out, reached number 1 on the UK charts anyway. In concerts during the Killer era in the United States, the song was performed in full, complete with the doll dismemberment, and was one of the centerpieces of a show that regularly packed arenas. The audience knew what they were there for. Number 6. Midnight Rambler by the Rolling Stones. Midnight Rambler was originally released on the Rolling Stones album Let It Bleed in December 1969, the same week as the Altamont Free concert. A coincidence of timing that gave the song an additional cultural weight it hadn't quite been carrying before. The song was a collaborative composition by Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, written partly in Positano, Italy, during a spring 1969 vacation. It is built around the figure of the Boston Strangler, Albert DeSalvo, who had been convicted in 1967 of a series of murders that terrorized the Boston area between 1962 and 1964. Jagger had been reading about the case while on holiday. The song is genuinely dark in a way that much rock music of the era aspired to without achieving. The production, handled by Jimmy Miller, who had also produced Beggar's Banquet, leans into that darkness, with the arrangement building and releasing tension in a way that gives the listener a sustained sense of menace. A harmonica runs through it like a thread. The tempo shifts twice. It builds, it breaks, it starts again. When the Stones performed the song on their 1969 US tour and the famous 1972 North American tour, Jagger would add a theatrical element, bringing out a belt and cracking it hard on the stage floor, acting out the role of the killer with a physicality that made the content impossible to ignore or aestheticize. Several American radio stations, particularly in the Northeast, where the Boston Strangler murders had been most directly experienced by the local population, refused to add the song to rotation. The BBC placed it on their restricted list. The objections were not factually inaccurate. It was a song that asked the listener to inhabit the perspective of a violent killer, and it did so with considerable craft and no obvious moral condemnation. The song's defenders argued that acknowledging the reality of violence was not the same as endorsing it. That distinction wasn't always accepted. At the 1969 Altamont concert, the Stones performed Midnight Rambler as part of their headline set, one of several songs that night. During the same show, 18-year-old Meredith Hunter was stabbed and killed by members of the Hells Angels. The event cast a permanent shadow over the song's already dark subject matter. The 1970 live album, Get Your Ya-Ya's Out, featured a version of Midnight Rambler that ran over 7 minutes and is considered by many critics to be the definitive Stones live performance. Number 5. Billy Don't Be a Hero by Paper Lace, 1974. The Bo Donaldson and the Haywoods version is better remembered in America, where it reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in June 1974. But the original 1974 recording by British band Paper Lace made the bigger impact in the UK, where it reached number 1 and stayed for 3 weeks. The song tells the story of a young soldier who volunteers for a dangerous mission against his fiancée's wishes, and who is killed. His death reported in a letter that arrives at the same moment she is writing to tell him to come home. Paper Lace themselves were a Nottingham pop group who had been performing the club circuit for several years before this record broke them nationally. The other version by Bo Donaldson and the Haywoods was recorded quickly to capitalize on the American market appetite for the song before Paper Lace's version could be properly promoted there.
Billy, don't be a hero. Come back and make me.
The song arrived at a sensitive moment. The Vietnam War was still ongoing in 1974. Draft exemptions were contentious, and the question of what counted as heroism and what counted as waste was a live political argument on both sides of the Atlantic. Several radio stations in the United States, particularly those with strong military-affiliated sponsorships, found the song's framing deeply uncomfortable. It presented the death of a soldier not as noble sacrifice, but as pointless tragedy, directly contradicted by the woman's grief and her plea that he come back, rather than volunteer for danger. In a 2011 Rolling Stone Readers poll of the worst songs of the 1970s, Billy Don't Be a Hero ranked 8th. The audience that had lived through its radio saturation had not forgiven it. That poll reflected something real about the song's position in popular memory. It was simultaneously widely heard, genuinely affecting, and the source of genuine resentment. Songs about war that questioned the premise of war did not find universal welcome on American radio in 1974. Number 4. Hurricane by Bob Dylan, 1975.
Here comes the story of the hurricane.
Hurricane was released in November 1975 as a single from Bob Dylan's album Desire. It was over 8 minutes long, already an obstacle for radio play before a single word of its content had been considered. It was a direct, angry piece of music, a narrative ballad about the case of Reuben Hurricane Carter, a black middleweight boxer who had been convicted in 1967 of a triple murder in Paterson, New Jersey, in a trial that Dylan and many others believed had been tainted by racism, witness perjury, and prosecutorial misconduct. The song named individuals by name, the witnesses whose testimony Dylan considered false, the judge, the community of Paterson itself. It made specific factual claims about a specific legal case involving living people. Columbia Records and some radio stations were nervous enough about the potential for defamation liability that the original single was edited to remove several of the most direct name references before being released to radio. The full 8-minute version with all the original names was restored on the Desire album, which reached number 1 on the Billboard 200 in February 1976. The BBC placed it on their restricted list, not because it described violence per se, but because its accusations were so direct and specific that broadcasting it risked the corporation becoming party to what could be considered defamatory statements. Several American stations declined to play even the edited version for similar reasons. Radio stations in the 1970s were operating under an FCC framework that made them cautious about broadcasting material that could be construed as defamation of named private individuals. Carter's conviction was eventually vacated in 1985 when a federal district court found that his prosecution had been fundamentally flawed and constitutionally tainted. He had spent nearly 20 years in prison. He died in 2014 at the age of 76. Dylan performed Hurricane regularly throughout the Rolling Thunder Revue Tour in 1975 and 1976, one of the most celebrated concert tours of the decade, playing it as the opening song at many shows, as if daring the audience to understand what they were about to hear.
Here
Number 3. Anarchy in the UK by the Sex Pistols, 1976. The Sex Pistols released Anarchy in the UK in November 1976, and the subsequent events moved so rapidly that the song barely had time to be played before it was being pulled. EMI Records, who had just signed the band, released the single into what they imagined would be modest controversy. What they got instead was a national emergency. On December 1st, 1976, the Sex Pistols appeared on Thames Television's Today program, sitting in for Queen on a magazine-format afternoon show hosted by Bill Grundy. Grundy, apparently dismissive of the band and apparently under the influence of alcohol, provoked them into swearing on live television. Johnny Rotten said, "Shit." Steve Jones called Grundy a fucking rotter. The exchange lasted less than a minute. The next morning, it was on the front page of every newspaper in Britain. EMI terminated the band's contract in January 1977. The BBC placed Anarchy in the UK on its restricted list. Many independent radio stations in the UK followed. The single had been released without any particular promotion, and without Pistols appearances on Top of the Pops, the standard promotional mechanism for singles chart success. And yet it reached number 38 on the UK charts on sales momentum alone. The song was violent in its content in the sense that it expressed a desire to destroy existing social structures. It was a political threat delivered in musical form, and the establishment heard it as such. Whether it was censored for violence or for politics depended on which side of that line you stood on. Number 2. God Save the Queen by the Sex Pistols, 1977.
God save the Queen. She ain't no human being.
The Sex Pistols appear twice on this list because the violence they generated around their music was continuous and escalating rather than a single incident. God Save the Queen, released in May 1977 during the Queen's Silver Jubilee celebrations, was a direct attack on the monarchy and the national mythology that surrounded it. The cover art, a photograph of the Queen's face with a safety pin through her nose, and the song title overlaid across her eyes in ransom note lettering, was itself considered a violent or threatening act in certain quarters. The BBC banned it immediately and completely. Radio Luxembourg banned it. Woolworths and W.H. Smith, two of the largest retail chains in Britain and the primary distribution channels for physical singles at the time, refused to stock it. The British Market Research Bureau, which at the time compiled the official UK singles chart from retail sales data, was widely accused of deliberately keeping the song from reaching number 1 during the Jubilee week, despite sales figures from independent record shops that suggested it should have topped the chart. The single was officially listed at number 2. Independent observers and the band themselves believed it had actually outsold the number 1 record, Rod Stewart's I Don't Want to Talk About It, which happened to be released the same week. After the song's release, members of the band and their associates were physically attacked in the streets of London on multiple occasions. Roadie John Tiberi was cut with a razor blade. Paul Cook was attacked with an iron bar. Rotten himself was attacked by men with knives in a car park. The violence moved in both directions, against the establishment in the song, against the band's people in reality. Malcolm McLaren, the band's manager, described the whole episode as the most successful piece of cultural intervention he had ever orchestrated. The song charted at number 2 while officially banned from radio. It is now considered one of the most significant single releases in British popular music history.
God save the Queen. She ain't no human being.
Number 1. I Don't Like Mondays by the Boomtown Rats, 1979.
Tell me why I don't like Mondays. Tell me why.
On the morning of January 29, 1979, 16-year-old Brenda Ann Spencer opened fire from her bedroom window at children arriving at Grover Cleveland Elementary School in San Diego, California. She had received a .22 caliber semi-automatic rifle as a Christmas gift from her father. In the 15 minutes before she was surrounded by police, she killed Principal Burton Ragg and custodian Mike Shar, and wounded 8 children and 1 police officer. When journalists reached Spencer by phone during the standoff that followed, they asked why she had done it. She said she didn't like Mondays. She said it livened up the day. Bob Geldof, the Boomtown Rats lead singer, was doing a radio interview at Georgia State University's campus station, WRAS, when the telex machine in the room started ringing with breaking news about the shooting. He read the report, including Spencer's explanation. He has described his reaction as one of stunned incomprehension at the flatness of her reasoning. He went back to his hotel and wrote the song the same day. The Rats debuted the song live within weeks. By the time it was released as a single in July 1979, it had been substantially developed from Geldof's original reggae-influenced draft into the piano-driven ballad it became. Recorded with Johnny Fingers on piano and a full orchestral arrangement, it reached #1 on the UK singles chart and remained there for 4 weeks. It won the Ivor Novello Award for Best Pop Song and Outstanding British Lyric. Spencer's family attempted to prevent the single's release in the United States. They failed. Many radio stations in San Diego, the city where the shooting had occurred, refused to play it out of respect for the victims and their families. The song peaked at only number 73 on the Billboard Hot 100, a fraction of its UK success, partly because the subject matter made American mainstream radio deeply uncomfortable. Schools, parents' groups, and some broadcasters argued that the song was an exploitation of a real tragedy. Geldof has consistently rejected that characterization. He has said that he was expressing the senselessness of what Spencer did, not celebrating it, that the horror of her explanation was itself the subject of the song. The song contains no gore, no graphic description of the shooting. Its power comes entirely from the contrast between the lightness of its piano melody and the weight of what it's describing. Spencer remained in prison for decades, denied parole repeatedly. She was still imprisoned as of 2025. The shooting at Grover Cleveland Elementary School is considered one of the first major modern school shootings in American history. It preceded Columbine by nearly 20 years. The song that came from it, in the hands of the right program director, was too violent to play. In the hands of history, it remains one of the most compassionate pieces of music about violence ever made. If any of these stories surprised you, hit the like button and subscribe. There are more stories like these waiting.